Dr. Maxim, welcome
Thank
to
you.
the A Man Unbound podcast. For full disclosure, this is my second attempt having you on the podcast.
That's right.
So the last time we had some obviously some tech issues nobody knows about. We're saying that only because you find yourself repetitive on some things, but you're so gracious to come back to the podcast.
It's a pleasure. I know it's always going to be different every time anyways. So.
That's right. So I'm going to go straight into it though. But before I do that, I'm going to just do a quick introduction of you. Sure. If I miss out on anything, please feel free to fill in the gaps. Dr. Maxim Lewkowski acquired his PhD at McGill University in clinical psychology and joined the Ordre Psychologues in 2007. After completing his post-doctoral work on depression and perfectionism, he has worked at a number of major teaching hospitals in Montreal. His training has been in cognitive behavioral therapy and working with patients in psychiatry and specialized chronic illnesses over the years. He splits his time between hospital clinics and private practice, including specialized sleep clinic. Which brings me to why you are here, Max.
That's right. Sleep. Let's talk about sleep.
Sleep is the question. So I would really like to get right into the sleep issue here. We have a bunch of questions which will make this a little bit more structured, a conversation that I would typically have. So feel free to answer these questions for me that I've been getting from my community. All right. Sure. And we can also have different podcasts if you're gracious enough with your time to answer other questions that you guys may have out there for Dr. Maxim. So how much sleep should people really get at night? What is the standard for that? What is the standard,
That's a good question. It's like anything with humans, there's a range, there's individual differences, and there's variability. The statistical average is around between 7 and 8 hours. That seems to be the statistical average.
Right.
But obviously, for an average, you've got to have people who need 10 hours, who are sort of more inefficient sleepers, and then you're going to have people who are on the shorter end, a little bit like yourself, who get their sleep in a more condensed period. And it's important to think about that. What's your your ideal number, and not to get hung up about a statistical average. And if I don't get my 8 hours, I'm going to have a problem.
Right. Because I can function perfectly well with 5 to 6 hours sleep max. Anything over 6 hours, something's wrong with me. I'm sick or something. But some people can't take anything less than 8 hours sleep. Does it really matter, or is it relative to the person and their lifestyle?
Honestly, it's relative to the person. The number of people who can function with less than 4 hours or less is the proportion. It rounds down to 0%. They're you'll never run into one. So for every person who's around 6, you're going to have the ones who are 7, 8, 9, and 10. And there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong.
So that narrative that I hear often, especially on social media, that if you're sleeping, you're lazy, you need to be on the grind, hustling for success. Who needs sleep? I've even heard a motivational speech of sleep is for the weak. What is your thought on that whole narrative, especially with the millennials these days and the younger guys? What would be your advice on that?
Sure. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to weigh in on it. I mean, I mentioned this a little bit to you last time we spoke, is the idea that there's kind of like two people. I break it into, obviously it's a simplification, but there's two big categories of people who, who denigrate sleep, who think it's not important, who poo-poo it, minimize it, try to get as little as possible, and I'll deal with it later. And then there's the people who worry a lot about their sleep, and where they're concerned about their sleep, and often it's people who are sleeping just fine, gets in the way of them being able to sleep. So I would kind of say, for people who really think sleep is a waste of their time, I would refer them to something like a book like Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, just to get a sense of how important this is for humans and for all living creatures. All animals have a sleep stage. Even worms go into something called a torpor. So for something to be so preserved evolutionarily and to be of no relevance, you're fooling yourself. The other group of people who know that sleep is important, I'm going to give a different advice and loosen up a little bit. Don't worry too much about making it perfect,
Right.
That's my long answer.
No, but I love the answer. So long as it's informative and the folks that are watching this can use it. How can we adjust our environment to sleep better? Is there something that we can do if you're not sleeping well, you're trying to avoid taking pills for it? Is there something you can do about your environment that could help you sleep?
A lot of the time, yes. A lot of the time there are environmental pieces that get in the way. You know, obviously if it's very bright or noisy, or there's people waking you up, those are things that are, or a cat that wakes you up. You know, these are things that you probably can mitigate. An ideal sleep environment, again, you don't want to get too hung up on it, but it should be quite cold. You know, they say around 19 degrees, maybe even colder. The bed should be comfortable. The mattress should be comfortable. It should be very dark. And then you should have a lead-in before sleep where you have a wind-down period. No screens at night. We know all about this.
Yes.
So yeah, there usually are things you can do to adjust your environment to make it more likely for you to sleep.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, does caffeine affect your sleep?
So it does, and there seem to be two categories of people who metabolize it quickly and those who metabolize it slowly. Most people would know who they are already at this point, because the people who metabolize it slowly tend to be the ones who say, oh, if I have a cup of coffee after lunch, I can't sleep at all. The people who metabolize it quickly are the ones who don't know what those other people are talking about. They can have an espresso with dinner and just go right to sleep, and it makes no difference. And I may be simplifying it a bit much, but usually the coffee you have in the morning does the trick for the whole day. And if you feel it's affecting your sleep, you push it back before lunch and not have anything in the afternoon if you want to play it safe.
Right. So again, it's all relative to the person on how it affects them.
It is, and it's a mild stimulant. You know, you're rarely going to meet. I've met people who have dozens of cups of coffee a day. In those cases, it could mess with your sleep. If you're having, one at lunch and there's other things going on, when you really get down to it and want to improve your sleep, assuming you're going to get help with a professional, they'll always do an assessment with all the details, all the parameters.
Right. You know, I have a question: is how long do you stop drinking any forms of liquid, maybe water, for example, before sleep? And the reason I ask is because I'm guessing as you get older, when you drink water, it could affect your sleep because you have to wake up while you're sleeping to go. You have to wake up from your sleep to go use the restroom.
Exactly.
And as the older you get, the more you're susceptible you are to the effects of drinking that water too close to bedtime. Am I right?
That's it. And well, it's that your sleep gets a little bit more fragile and it gets harder to get the sleep you need as you age. You know, starting when you're 20s, it gets just a little bit harder over the years. So you'd want to minimize or control the variables that you can with sleeping. I mean, I've met people who were very concerned about being fully hydrated and they were drinking a lot of fluids, but it was interfering with their sleep. They were drinking a lot of fluids even close to bedtime. So what I've understood is if you can get your hydration, but just the same volume, but just a little earlier in the day, you'll be fine. If that's what's waking up. Again, waking up once a night to pee is not a problem.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty normal. But if that one wake up then makes it hard for you to go to sleep, usually it's worth looking at what else might be going on, or having your fluids a little earlier.
Right. I can't. If I wake up at all at night, I'm done. That's the end of my night. I have to be up the rest of the night, and that's where the tech comes in. Then you're responding to emails, and there goes your night. It's over. It's game over.
That's it. And again, that's individual differences, and you have your own way of dealing with it. And again, there's sort of normal sleep, and you can fine tune it. And then there's people who actually have a diagnosable sleep problem, and it's a little. These are different categories as well.
Could you touch on that for me? You just said some people who have a diagnosed sleep problem?
Well, a diagnosable sleep problem, there's lots of different sleep problems people can have, but a very common one that I see is actual insomnia, where they have adequate opportunity to sleep, but they're not able to fall asleep. And that's typically people who will then worry about not being able to fall asleep, and then they get a conditioned performance anxiety about sleep, and then the bed starts getting scary, and then they lie in bed and they're wide awake and they can't understand it. And there are very straightforward ways to work on that. That's the good news, because people suffer a lot with insomnia.
Yeah. So how do you? Okay, so you just made a distinction between insomnia and not being able to sleep. Now, isn't there a middle ground there where you don't have insomnia, but you find there's some cases where you can't sleep? Because I've caught myself staying in bed knowing that I'm not worried, but I'm excited about a performance or a meeting or an event I have the next day. And I'm saying to myself, go to sleep, go to sleep, go to sleep.
Exactly.
And the more cognizant I am of the importance of me sleeping, the less I tend to sleep. And there you go. I'm up all night, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's the normal form of sort of performance anxiety about sleep, or when we have a big thing coming up. That's normal. Everyone gets that.
Right.
The question, where it becomes problematic, if it's happening more than half of the time for a number of months, then now what's happening is your body is getting conditioned to stress in bed. And it's not because of the big presentation you've got the next day or the flight. It's because now the bed has become a place where they lie awake and try to sleep. And the more we try to sleep, the more we realize we can't do it.
Yes.
So there are, you know this. So there's some pretty simple pieces where we can recondition ourselves to sleep. And they usually involve leaving the bed when we're not asleep after about 20 minutes. And so then what's interesting is it's opposite performance. Now we have to stay awake. So it's the middle of the night. Yeah, it's the middle of the night. I want to be asleep, but instead I'm making myself stay awake, not by going to the gym, but by sitting up and doing something boring until I get sleep and then returning to bed. So,
so you're resetting the whole body clock right then to kind of get back into a sleep mode. Is that it?
Basically, that's a nice way to put it. So by taking away the performance part and just letting your body do what it can already do. That it works for me, it works for you, and it's one of those pieces in getting our sleep better.
No, it's curious you mentioned that, because I've done that and it has worked, but it depends on what I do. Like if I get up,
that's it.
And if I get up and relax and drink a cup of tea or something like that and do some relaxing, perhaps read a book, I don't know, go to sleep. But if I get up and I start watching the news, for example,
exactly. Then you're awake, and now your brain is like, oh, he's just starting his day at 3.
That's a good point.
And that you just characterized it perfectly. And if you were helping someone with that sleep problem, it would be the advice you gave at the first part, which is read a book, low light, in a calm place.
Yeah.
And when you start having the signs of sleepiness, like yawning, rereading the same lines, or getting chill, you return to bed and just see what happens. And then invariably people tend to fall asleep with that. Whereas if you start your day or get really active, forget it. Now you're awake,
I'm very sensitive to time here because I know how generous you've been with your time today. I know you have meetings afterward. So I'm going to get right down to a few last questions here. Yeah. So teenagers, let's say teens and sleep, are most teens lazy when they oversleep? Or they're really just part of their growth process? This is good for parents to hear.
It's a super question, and it was Walker's book that actually cued me into this, because I don't work with adolescents, I don't work with children, I work with adults. But adolescents' sleep phase shifts where they only get sleepy later at night than when they were children or than adults. And so what happens is they cannot go to sleep at the right time. They want to go to sleep later, but then their sleep phase is shifted. They need to be allowed to sleep in. So waking a teenager is cruel and unusual, and it's important to let them get the sleep they need, especially the late night sleep, the early morning sleep, I should say, because that's where their brain is doing rapid eye movement sleep, and it's especially important for emotional well-being and social cognition and these kind of things. So never wake a sleeping teenager.
It's like waking a sleeping cobra.
I'm sure it's as dangerous and it's as bad for your health as it is for
it's life-threatening.
The teenagers.
All right. So how do you know if you have insomnia? Because there's a lot of people that have serious problem with the sleep to the point where it's obviously affected their lives. Like it affects their attitude. It affects how they perform. It really just affects their general lifestyle. I mean, how do you know if it's no longer you kind of need to make some adjustments, or you really have a medical situation going on here?
That's a really good question. I intuitively, I encourage people to try to make some adjustments and see where you get. And when you feel like you can't manage it or it's not going well, then you outsource it and you go and talk to a sleep professional or go to a sleep lab or a psychologist, because the neat thing about insomnia is real clinical diagnosable insomnia disorder is very treatable, and it's treatable with not a lot of sessions and not a lot of work. So yeah, I encourage people to, do what they can, but if you feel like you need help, you may not need a lot of help. And so I would encourage you to reach out to typically your GP or your psychologist to try to get a little specialized information, because it's not complicated, but it is kind of specialized.
No, I appreciate you touching on that. And does lack of sleep seriously affect your mental health?
So on the short term, it doesn't do a lot. It does make you less creative, more irritable. There's a bunch of things. But day to day, it doesn't, on one given day, often, I don't know if you've had this experience, you have a really bad night or almost no sleep, and you almost don't even notice it in the day. In the afternoon, you're like, oh yeah, I had that bad night. Why am I functioning so well? On the long term, right? Yeah, okay, right. On the long term, you want the optimum, you want to get the best sleep that you can. So on the long term, it's not good for you. But the odd night here and there is really not a problem. And sometimes people get very hung up about, like, man, I had a bad night, now and have all kinds of health issues. It's not one-to-one. We're robust.
How do we help our kids sleep better?
Yeah, so with kids as well as with adults, and again, it's a little outside of my area, but with kids and adults, a lot of it is about conditioning and predictability, because a lot of what goes on in sleep is a habit, and it's conditioned. And so, if you only ever spend time sleeping in your bed, you when you lie down there, your brain is conditioned to put you right out. If you spend half your time in your bed, doing, watching Netflix, and the other half sleeping, your brain starts not knowing. So it's important for adults to condition their sleep to make the parameters very predictable. So it's like with kids, they have a routine, they have a bath, the book at a certain time, and it's all very predictable, and their brain already knows what's coming. And then when they get to bed, they go to sleep nicely. When we have a break in routine for kids as well as for adults, it's harder to fall asleep unless we're really, really exhausted. So I would say focus on the routine aspects.
Wow, the routine, that's good. That's good to know. And just to segue from that, does napping help kids? Does napping help adults? The whole idea of napping?
Kids are a little outside of my area, but napping generally, it is a good and it's a healthy thing. You can get in a nap. It is a beneficial thing. It's only when the nap is so long that it takes up one of your sleep cycles that then interferes with you falling asleep. But if you have a lifestyle where you can get a nap, they encourage usually keep it under 20 minutes, so it doesn't chop into your nighttime sleep. But napping is absolutely good, and it's great. And there's even studies about lifestyle, like health changes in countries when they abolish naps and stuff. Again, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I can't really give you the details on that too much. But if you're napping and you have sleep problems, consider chopping the nap. If you're not napping, consider adding it in if you can.
Oh, that's really useful, because obviously I'm from England, and back in England, or back even in Africa, we used to naps. Napping was part of the process. But as I got older and got to America, and I realized that, sleep was not something that, especially napping during the day, was not something that was admired. It's something that was looked at poorly. But it was not something that I used a lot. But I wondered if that was a tool that could be used beneficially,
For sure. And I give you one other example that you'll appreciate. Usain Bolt is a big napper. And on the days of his best performances, he had naps as well. Now, again, maybe this is a bit of a tenuous link, but it does so much good for us that I think Walker talks about it a little bit in his book as well. But napping, we're almost wired up for it in the afternoon. In the afternoon, where everyone gets a little tired. But that's often in cultures where you have a natural dip in vigilance and sleepiness, and people nap, and then you're ready to go, and it should not interfere with your bedtime sleep.
That's a great point you just made, because I was watching a UFC athlete, Adesanya, who's a UFC champion, and he would sleep right before sometimes right before his fight, or he would go into sleep mode. And he tried to explain to his team that he wasn't just sleeping, he was kind of resetting and getting into this zone in preparation for his fights. It was pretty interesting. I thought, wow, imagine going in sleep mode. Usually when you think of someone going to any competitive sports, especially when it's that physical, they all get up and fired up. He was going in sleep mode. He's a champion, so it must be working.
So, and this is, even speaking to what I was saying about Bolt, is that it probably takes a special person to nap right before a big match also. So this may be also about their own stress management skills, that they can mellow out to the point that they can go to sleep. That gives them an edge. But sleep does amazing things for memory, and we'll get a chance, I'm sure, to talk a little bit more about sleep.
So the last question I have for you, and I ask everybody this, right? Since we have a few minutes to wrap it up. I always like to know the person behind the person. And since you're under a man unbowed, could you tell me a quick story where, something has impacted your life in a really positive way, or some experience has actually impacted your life in a very positive way? Even in your adult life, you can still draw from that as a lesson and you want to share.
I mean, the one that comes to mind is it was a big loss. It was a really sad loss for me. A major loss was in the last 2 years ago, losing my closest friend. And the reason why I would say that was such an important moment for me is that it just reminded me, obviously, is all the grief and the loss, and it also just reminded me how important our own health is, how important life is, how precious it is, how it's fleeting, and how there's no guarantee and we don't know how long we've got, and to really try to make the most of what's in front of us and take care of ourselves, including with sleep, take care of ourselves so that we can have the best, sort of adventure, if you will, going forward. And I often think about my friend. It motivated me to take better care of myself. In terms of sleep, in terms of exercise, and just in terms of like work-life balance.
Wow, Dr. Maxim, thank you for sharing such a profoundly personal and powerful story. I really appreciate you doing that. And even in that spirit of gratitude, I would like to say, you know what? One of the things we should be most grateful for is our health. You can't put a value to how important health is. So again, I thank you for everything. I thank you for your time. And I look forward to speaking to you again. I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. I appreciate the invite.
And now you can run off to your next meeting. Thanks you so
again.
much.
Thank you, Eamon. Take care.
All right. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Dr. Maxim Lewkowski acquired his PhD at McGill University in clinical psychology and joined the Ordre Psychologues in 2007. After completing his post-doctoral work on depression and perfectionism, he has worked at a number of major teaching hospitals in Montreal. His training has been in cognitive behavioral therapy and working with patients in psychiatry and specialized chronic illnesses over the years. He splits his time between hospital clinics and private practice, including specialized sleep clinics.